There is a city in central Italy that seems to exist outside of time. Not because it is particularly old. Italy is full of old cities. Not because it is particularly beautiful. Italy is full of beautiful cities too. Siena is different for a stranger reason. Because it stopped. Everything you see in its historic center, the palaces, the towers, the churches, the streets, was built in a single extraordinary span of 88 years, between 1260 and 1348. Then, something happened. And Siena, in a sense, never resumed. What you are about to see is not a postcard. It is the story of a city that reached the very peak of human civilization, lost everything, and, in losing everything, was preserved like an insect in amber, exactly as it was at its greatest moment. Its symbol is the balzana, a shield divided in two, the top half white, the bottom half black. They say it represents purity and darkness, heaven and earth, salvation and perdition. They are not wrong. But before the symbol, there was the place. To understand Siena, you have to understand a road. The Via Francigena was the main artery of medieval Europe. It ran from Canterbury in England all the way to Rome. Thousands of people walked it every year, pilgrims, merchants, soldiers, and kings. And Siena was right on it. The city sat on a ridge of 3 hills, but these hills held a secret and a challenge. Siena is a city with no river. To survive, its people had to carve their own water from the earth. Deep beneath the pavement, they dug miles of sandstone tunnels, the bottini, a hidden, silent labyrinth of veins that brought life to the fountains above. A city on a hill, drinking from the dark. Even the city seemed divided between above and below, towers rising toward heaven, water moving beneath the stone. Toward the end of the 9th century, a cobbler named Sorore began offering shelter to pilgrims in a small house across from the cathedral. His act of charity would grow into one of the greatest institutions in Europe. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Wealth followed the road, and with wealth came ambition. The pilgrims brought faith. The merchants brought something more useful, capital. And Siena, it turned out, had a genius for capital. By the 12th century, Siena's merchants had discovered that moving money was more profitable than making things. The great banking houses, the Bonsignori, Salimbeni, and Piccolomini, became the financiers of popes and kings across Europe. They invented letters of credit and currency exchange centuries before the rest of the world. They had offices in London, Paris, Lyon, and Bruges. The Pope himself banked with Siena. This was not piety. This was power. And the city had a color of its own: burnt earth, dust, dried blood. The world would eventually call it Siena. But in 1260, power was not enough. A Florentine army was marching. Siena was terrified. On the 2nd of September, the night before the battle, they made a vow that no other city in history had ever made. They handed Siena to the Virgin Mary. Not symbolically, legally, with a notarized act. She would be the sovereign. They would be her administrators. 2 days later, at Montaperti, the Sienese destroyed the Florentines. Dante wrote that the river Arbia ran red with blood. Whether the Virgin intervened is a matter of theology. What is certain is that from that day forward, the city did not belong to its citizens. It belonged to her. Armed with faith and capital, Siena set about building the most ambitious city in medieval Europe. And for 68 years, it almost succeeded. The golden age of Siena was governed by 9 men, the Nove, not nobles, merchants. Under them, Siena became something that medieval Europe had never seen. Children in school, public health, regulated markets, women free to walk the streets unaccompanied. A right that most European cities would not grant for another 5 centuries. The city worked with frightening precision. This was the Siena that raised the Torre del Mangia to 102 meters, exactly as tall as the cathedral's bell tower. A calculated statement carved in stone. Here, the state and the church stand equal. Neither bows to the other. Ambrogio Lorenzetti painted this world on the walls of the Palazzo Pubblico. Dancing women and plowed fields, merchants at work, children playing, hills fading into the distance. The first secular landscape in the history of Italian painting. A civilization convinced of its own permanence. In the spring of 1348, a ship arrived. The Black Death. It reached Siena in May. By autumn, more than half the population was gone. Entire households vanished. Workshops closed. Bells rang without pause. Ambrogio Lorenzetti died. His brother Pietro died. The city that had believed itself chosen by heaven suddenly looked abandoned by it. The Sienese tried to defy the collapse. They began a new cathedral, the grandest in Italy. They got as far as the walls of the nave. Then they stopped. The walls are still there, open to the sky. The facciatone, a sentence interrupted mid-word. A city frozen in the middle of a thought. The plague took the artists, the builders, the governors, but not everything. One institution had been built for exactly this kind of catastrophe. The house of the cobbler Sorore had not stopped, and it would not stop for another 600 years. The cobbler's shelter had grown, over 4 centuries, into something without precedent. The Santa Maria della Scala was not just a hospital. It was a declaration of what a city owed its people. It raised the oblati, children left on its steps, educating them, finding them work. It housed pilgrims regardless of where they came from or whether they could pay. In the 1440s, a painter named Domenico di Bartolo covered its great ward with frescoes that have no equal in medieval art. Patients being washed and fed, doctors at work, children swaddled and given to wet nurses. Not saints, not miracles, people caring for other people. Inside a building that was itself a work of art. The Santa Maria della Scala functioned for over 1,000 years, in the same building, on the same street, across from the same cathedral, until 1995. And as the dynasties fell, a new kind of institution rose in their place. In 1472, the Republic voted to establish a Monte di Pietà, a public bank to free the poor from moneylenders. The motion passed 196 votes to 14. It is still open today. Monte dei Paschi di Siena, the oldest bank in the world. Its name comes from the Paschi, the grazing lands of the Maremma, whose revenues backed the bank's capital from 1624 onward. In a city that had always mixed the sacred and the financial, there was something fitting about a bank whose collateral was grass. But of all the things Siena built, the towers, the hospitals, the banks, the frescoes, none would prove more permanent, more alive, more resistant to time than something that could not be built in stone at all. Siena is divided into 17 neighborhoods, the contrade, the caterpillar, the snail, the she-wolf, the eagle, the giraffe. In 1729, their boundaries were officially fixed. They have remained virtually unchanged ever since. A Sienese is born into a contrada, not chosen, born. To betray it would be to betray their own soul. There is something else Siena invented, the Palio. It is not a horse race. It is the oldest civic ritual in Europe. Its roots reach back to the 12th century when the city organized a race along the streets leading to the cathedral. The prize was a bolt of precious cloth, the pallium, from which the name Palio derives. By the 13th century, the race was dedicated to the Virgin of the Assumption. Of course it was. In those early races, the horses belonged to Cesare Borgia, the Gonzaga, the Este, Lorenzo de' Medici. The riders had names that tell you everything about the world they came from. Tremalmondo, from Ferrara. Amadio non può perire. Amadio, cannot die. Others, Ponder and God disposes. To win here was to say something that mattered. In the early 17th century, the race moved from the narrow streets to Piazza del Campo. Now everyone could see. Twice a year, 10 horses run 3 laps. The horse who wins, wins, even without a rider. The riderless horse, the scosso, is one of the Palio's most poetic possibilities. It has happened. Draw your own conclusions. The horse is blessed inside the Contrada's church. Holy water, incense, a priest who has done this before and will do it again. Then, it is sent around a curve so sharp it seems to reject the very idea of safety. The crowd screams, priests pray, drums thunder. The sacred and the brutal held in the same gaze, as they have always been in Siena. The Contrade were born in a world of constant threat, where survival depended on solidarity, on knowing exactly who was yours and who was not. In 1552, that ancient instinct would be tested for the last time. In 1552, Siena made its last choice, to remain free. Cosimo de' Medici and the Empire laid siege. 16,000 soldiers tightened a ring around the city. For over a year, the city starved. 3,000 women built the fortifications themselves. The Fortino delle Donne. The French commander, Blaise de Montluc, who fought alongside the Sienese, wrote afterward that he had never seen people defend themselves with such tenacity. But tenacity has limits. When food ran out, the commander expelled the bocche inutili, or the useless mouths of medieval Siena. The old, the children, the sick. They walked out of the gates into a no-man's land between two armies. Cosimo's orders were precise. Men found leaving were to be killed. Women stripped and sent back. Peasants trying to bring food in to be hanged. Hundreds died between the walls. Siena was conquered more by famine than by iron. On the 17th of April, 1555, the Republic surrendered. The city that had held 40,000 souls before the siege now held fewer than 6,000. But 1,000 Sienese refused to accept it. They walked out of Porta Romana, south through the Val d'Orcia, and established the Republic of Siena in exile in Montalcino. They kept the ember alive for 4 more years. Until the Peace of Cateau-Cambrésis finally extinguished it in 1559. The last independent commune of Italy did not go quietly. It went hungry, armed, and undefeated in spirit into the dark. And so, Siena passed into history. Or so it seemed. Because history, as Siena has always known, has a strange relationship with endings. History has a strange sense of humor. Cosimo de' Medici took Siena, and then he ignored it. No new palaces, no grand redesigns, no transformation into a modern capital. Florence had all of that. Siena got administration, and so the city stopped changing. The streets that were medieval in 1348 were still medieval in 1600, in 1800, and are still medieval today. The building campaign of the Nine, those 88 extraordinary years, was preserved not by any law of conservation, but by irrelevance. Siena survived because nobody cared enough to destroy it. There is a word in Italian, malinconia, a beauty that contains loss. You feel it at dusk in Piazza del Campo, when the shadows fill the 9 segments of the square, and the Torre del Mangia turns the color of old gold. You realize, with something between joy and grief, that you are standing in the 14th century. What remains is not a ruin. It is a conversation that was never concluded. The Balzana still flies from the tower, white and black. Everything that was built, and everything that was lost. Some cities tell you what they are. Siena asks you to stand still in the middle of the afternoon and figure it out for yourself.